So good morning uh, to our mavens. It's nice to be with you. It's Thursday, October 23rd. We are continuing our fall 2025 semester of learning around Gemara on the boundary of life and death. Rabbi Plakow sends regards and regrets as she is conducting a temple funeral this morning. So I'm your solo pilot through today's learning. We are going to dive right in with one of the Talmud's most celebrated passages, one that possibly is familiar to you because I think I've referenced it in previous classes a long time ago, and I've also incorporated it into various sermons because I think it has so much to offer. It's one of those kind of a traditional text that is often referenced by rabbis in their High Holy Day remarks. So, without delay, let's take a look at Gemara, Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Shabbat, page 31a. And I have a tab set up ready to go for us this morning. So I'll begin right here. Um, so the passage that we're going to examine first today um, kind of picks us up midstream, so I need to give just a few moments of introduction to where we are in Gemara. Tractate Shabbat, nominally about what the title tells us, which is the Sabbath, but of course, idiomatically, Talmud rarely sticks to one lane, and in fact, there are all sorts of curious off-ramps and detours and rabbit holes to explore. And this appears to be one such. So, previous to the passage we're going to take up this morning, we have a long uh, passage here framed by the Amoraic sage Rish Lakish. You can read about this fellow over here, an Amora of the second generation of the Rabbinic Commonwealth, Shimon ben Lakish, or Resh Lakish, as he was known in Aramaic. You get a little bit of a capsule bio. Is playing with a verse from the prophet Isaiah. So from the Hebrew Bible, it's this verse here, Isaiah chapter 33, verse 6. And I want to actually begin with that verse because we're going to use it as our starting reference point for today's Gemara. So it's the one that is just faintly highlighted in blue. Faithfulness to your charge was her wealth, wisdom and devotion, her triumph, reverence for God, that was her treasure. The feminine pronouns here all point to the antecedent, which appears to be Zion in verse 5. Usually, God is portrayed in biblical literature in masculine terms and imagery, and Israel or the people or the city of Jerusalem are often clothed in feminine terminology. And then just to get the Hebrew alongside it, Vaya emunat itecha, chosen yeshuot chochma, chochmat vada'at. So this is really thorny Hebrew, the way most of the writing in the prophets is. It's poetic, imagistic, not readable the way you read prose, but operates by its own poetic rules of syntax, grammar, and all of the literary devices that we associate with poetry, the use of imagery and metaphor as opposed to just speaking plainly. And the superscript here, the little letter F that I just highlighted, when it says your charge, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Thank you. That's what I suspected. That again, as I said, it's poetry. It's hard to translate, but the phrase that is going to come up as the starting and I believe ending point of our first text that we're examining today is actually the second clause in this poetic verse. Yirat Adonai Hi Otsaro. So these four words here, I've just highlighted them. And these are a little bit simpler to translate. Yirat Adonai. Yirah is one of the many words in the Jewish tradition that means fear, though usually connoting awe, religious reverence, as opposed to there's a monster in my closet kind of fear. So the fear of God or the fear of Adonai, he otsaro, is her treasure. or was, they put in the past tense, was her treasure. Again, referring to Zion, meaning the Jewish people. So this notion that to live in an attitude of deep, encompassing reverence for God, so much so that you are always in fear of God. Again, fear tracking more toward awe than quaking in your boots, though I should say, even today, religious Jews of a certain kind are associated with this quality of religiously oriented fear. Many of you are familiar with the term Haredi. The Haredim literally take their name from a verb, chared or charad, which means to quake. So the Haredim are the original Quakers, right? The Haredim, it's exactly the same as the Quakers and the Shakers of American uh, kind of, colonial leaning puritanical Christianity, though not derived directly from the movement that we sometimes mistakenly call the Puritans, which was a separatist movement in England that came over here seeking to be even more religiously radical than they were permitted to be under the monarchy back on the British Isles. The Quakers are a known sect in American life that take their name from their overt physicality in their devotion. So Quakers track in, direct translation to Haredim. So this idea that, a certain encompassing attitude of religious devotion might actually cause you to quake in the presence of God is one that is familiar to us both from Jewish and from Christian tradition. And the association here is that fear of God is not a bad thing. It's actually a very, very strong virtue in the Jewish tradition. So that's where our text begins. It begins with that reference to a verse from the prophet Isaiah. And you don't need to know more about the context of Isaiah's prophecy to follow along. So we're going to now continue. So the passage we're looking at here goes as follows. And I kind of liked what Rabbi Plakow did last week. She reformatted the text so that it was side by side as opposed to up down. So I'm going to read from the left-hand column, but it corresponds with the right-hand column. And just as a reminder, the bold text is what is actually written in the original, the Hebrew and Aramaic. The plain text is an interpolation thanks to our friend Steinsaltz, who is our translator and commentator. Okay, Amar Rava. So Rava said, and again, you want to know more about Rava, you click here. Who is Rava? Also an Amora, a fourth generation sage. He is known for his debates with Abaye. Often the Talmud will present us with a set of opinions where Rava is on one side of a debate and Abaye is on the other. And you can see very distinguished in terms of having been the head of a yeshiva. So a little bit on Rava over there. And Rava, as Steinsaltz helpfully points out, is actually commenting on the verse above, which is the fear of the Lord is his treasure. Okay, so one who fears God is particularly cherished, or to fear God is a virtue in the Jewish tradition. Let's leave it at that. And then it says, Bisha'ah shemachnisin adam ladin. So literally, at the time, Bisha'ah, at the hour that a person, an adam, enters into judgment, ladin. Okay, and when would that be? Well, Steinsaltz helpfully clarifies for us after departing from this world. We're not talking about standing in an earthly court. We're talking about standing in the court of divine judgment in the hereafter, whatever that may look like. All right? So when a person enters into judgment, omrim lo, literally, they say to him. Well, who are the they? One may only conjecture here. One may speculate that God has a court of angels or divine messengers who participate in the act of judging every person after death in order to determine what's going to happen to this now soul or disembodied entity that has entered to be presented for judgment. So they, a divine court, of some kind, not specified here. So again, one can only speculate what the rabbis have in mind. Gives us a lot of room for us to imagine. Okay, they say to him, and immediately an interrogation begins. So this is what the court will ask of us after we die. Nasata v'natata be'emunah. So this is the first question we are asked. Nasata v'natata be'emunah. Literally, did you engage in giving and taking faithfully? Here, they translate it more idiomatically. Did you conduct business faithfully? So this is a question about your work life or your financial affairs. And even today, these two words, nasata, which means to lift up or carry, and or to hold, and natata, which comes from natan or latate is the Hebrew word, which means to give. So did you engage in the give and take, negotiations, but it is a shorthand for transactions, business. Did you do your business be'emunah, faithfully? And the root of emunah, by the way, is a word we all know and use all the time, which is the aleph, the mem, and then skipping the vav to the nun, which spells amen. Amen is an affirmation of faith, right? If somebody says a blessing and then you say amen, that's your way of saying, I also agree with your blessing, or I am faithfully assenting to whatever you have just spoken. Amen. May it be so. Emunah is the quality of faith or steadfastness or integrity. There are lots of different ways of trying to get at a good idiomatic translation of this word emunah, recognizing that no translation will capture exactly what the Hebrew intends to convey. But okay, so the first question we're asked after we die is, did you engage in business faithfully? Did you do your business like a mensch, with integrity? All right, next question. What will they? That's not the only thing you will be asked when you die. The next one is kavata itim la Torah. Kavata is a word that means to fix or establish, to make something a habit. Many of us studied a while back with me a class that I taught on the Sidur. And you also, if you were participating in our study of Pirkei Avot a couple of years ago, you may remember that this word keva, or the verb form here, kavata, did you fix, or you fixed, is one of the modalities with which we approach our prayer life. Our spiritual life is made up of two different elements that are kind of in a yin-yang relationship. On the one hand, prayer is a discipline in Judaism, and a discipline is connoted through the word keva. So prayer in Jewish tradition has a keva, right? You don't just show up to a Pesach Seder and wing the whole thing. You have a book called the Haggadah. But the rabbis insist, and this is the piece that you might recall from our study of Pirkei Avot, that if you approach prayer only as an act of keva, it risks becoming rote and meaningless, and therefore you are also instructed to pray with kavanah, which is a word that means intention. So on the one hand, you have the discipline of prayer. On the other hand, you got to have heart, right? Or mind. You have to apply yourself in such a way so that your prayer is not merely a rote activity. All right, so often the word keva in Jewish thought is associated with any fixed practice. Most often we associate it with prayer. You can even, as a shorthand, and rabbis and cantors do this all the time, refer to the list that we make for a Friday night service that the cantor will circulate usually a day or two ahead of the service. Amanda is our senior cantor. She's leading the cantorial aspect of tomorrow night's service. She just called me a half hour ago to say, I'll send you the keva for tomorrow night shortly. And I know that that's just shorthand for what pages are we reading tomorrow night? What compositions are we singing tomorrow night, right? That's the keva. But of course, if we just go through the motions and read the keva in a kind of stultifying voice with no additional commentary or no invitation to go deeper, then there's no kavanah And what kind of a prayer service is that? Not one that I want to be part of. Okay, so keva and kavana. In this case, keva is used as a verb, kavata. Did you fix? Did you set or establish or discipline? And again, in this case, we're not talking about prayer. It says itim, literally times, la Torah. Did you establish or fix times for study? So, congratulations. I don't know if everybody in this class has been faithful in your business transactions, but I can vouchsafe, and I will if I'm ever asked, that every single one of you did fulfill commandment number 2. I hope you'll keep up with it, but you'll be able to answer in the affirmative in the hereafter when asked, did you fix a time for study of Torah? I sure did. I studied with my group from Westchester Reformed Temple every Thursday at 10:15. Okay, let's move on from there. That's question number 2. Question number 3. Asakta bifria urevia. Did you engage in literally, it says procreation, but again, literally, that's not literally, that's idiomatically. Literally, it says, did you engage in being fruitful and multiplying? And if you recall from last semester, the rabbis were attentive because we did a year's study last year on Gemara on the Jewish life cycle. And this is actually kind of like a coda to that study because we're going deep into death, dying, mourning, afterlife stuff in the Gemara. So we're kind of still measuring the Jewish life cycle through Gemara. You may recall that when we got to the passage on childbirth and parenting, that the rabbis were quick to expand the definition of procreation of being fruitful and multiplying, the first mitzvah or commandment that is given to humanity in the opening chapters of the book of Genesis, to include ways of being considered as in fulfillment of the mitzvah without biologically or bringing children into the world. In fact, it states, and this is something that is, I noted at the time, personally significant for me, that one who raises children up to Torah has fulfilled the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying as well, as the rabbis understand that mitzvah. So did you engage in the fruitfulness and multiplication of the world? Or more idiomatically, perhaps, were you attentive to your family life? So business is first, Torah is second, children or family are third. I'm going to ask you a question later on is, do you perceive any significance in the order in which these are written? I'll fully disclose, I don't have a set answer to that question. I'm just, every time I read the text, I want to ask questions of it. And one of my questions is, why this order? Why is the very first question, were you faithful in business? That's intriguing to me. And then, did you fix a time for Torah? And then, were you attentive to be fruitful and multiply? Okay, next one. Really, really interesting question. Tzipita lishua. So here they said, did you await salvation? Tzipita literally comes from a word, litzapot, which means to gaze into the future or to anticipate. And lishua means deliverance or salvation. I'm going to let that one stand because I think it's a fair translation. And because nothing else is offered here on understanding that phrase, I'm going to return to it when we open this for dialogue in a moment. So question number 4, did you await salvation or did you anticipate salvation, whatever that may mean? Next one, pilpalta b'chochma. So this is really interesting, and it's also, again, I'm intrigued by the order in that it doesn't immediately follow, did you set a fixed time for study of Torah? Pilpalta b'chochma. Here they say, did you engage in the dialectics of wisdom? Well, yeah, right. What the hell does that mean? Hard to say. Chochma clearly is wisdom, this word here. So we know that the object of the question is wisdom. But the verb, the predicate, is a little bit harder to sort out. The word literally is pilpalta, this fellow right here. And it's a great word. Does anyone know what a pilpel is in Hebrew? Yeah, if Jane is with us, she might know what a pilpel is. So a pilpel is a pepper. I even wonder if the word pepper is um, grammatically or etymologically linked to pilpel. Um, and so it's a fruit that has a sharp bite. And turned into a verb, lipalpel, to take a little pepper, is always applied as a specific linguistic term pertaining to how Jews study their sacred literature. We don't just do a broad cursory read. We're actually doing it right now by paying this much attention to a single word, to every nuance of the text. That is to do a pilpel. Literally, you are like you want to season the text like with pepper, right? So, or it means to be really granular. So this is really interesting that the rabbis would put forward this notion that when you die and you're presented for judgment in the hereafter, whatever that may be, whatever that may look like, the divine court is going to ask you a number of questions. Number five, were you like a pepper in how you approached wisdom? Okay, these may not. If I had just started the class by saying, okay, what questions do you think you're going to be asked when you die, as you are judged in the hereafter, suspending any belief or disbelief around that. I doubt anyone would have just intuitively said, oh, I think they're going to ask me if I was like a pepper when it came to wisdom, whatever that may mean. We'll come back to it though, because I'm intrigued not only by what the text says, but by how it lands with you. Next one. Okay. Hevanta davar mitoch davar. All right, now it really seems like we're playing in the same field. Hevanta davar mitoch davar. Literally, were you able to, or did you discern or understand a word within a word? Here, or a matter within a matter. Here it says, or understand one matter from another. So, as a learner, were you precise and discerning? All right, that I think is an idiomatic approach, but again, I'm going to just kind of leave this open for your interpretation. All right. Those are the questions we are asked. And again, maybe a few that don't surprise you. Were you attentive to your family life? Were you faithful in business? Maybe a few that do surprise you. Were you peppery in your pursuit of wisdom? And were you able to discern one thing or one word from another? Ve'afilu hachi, if so, if that is the case, I yirat Adonai hi otzaro, in. If that is how you approached your life through these specific measures, which are going to be asked of you, you're going to be interrogated.
Could we
If
go to the
so,
book of
then
Torah?
indeed,
Yes.
indeed,
Book
the
of
fear of the
Torah.
Lord is your
Night
treasure.
table.
All
Yeah.
right. That's how we know that a person has treasured God, as per the verse from Isaiah, which was, as I reminded us at the outset, the starting point of this sugya, of this passage. Ila, ila, la. But if not, then no. If not, then you have not earned the treasure associated in the book of Isaiah with the fear of God. Okay? And then an example is given here. So this word here is a really important hermeneutic in Talmud study. The word is mashal. A mashal is a parable. And you can even see that if I just slide down a little bit on the right-hand side, though what always happens is the English side runs longer than the Hebrew side because English is a much more discursive language, and it has the translator's gloss as well on the right-hand side. But here's a mashal, a parable, le'adam, to a person she'amar lishlucho. He said to his agent or his ambassador or his emissary. So a person has another person is in his employ whom he has commissioned to do a thing for him. Ha'aleli kor chitin la'alia. All right, go get me A core is a solid measure, so a measure of something solid, of wheat. So go get me like a barrel of wheat and bring it upstairs, la aliyah. All right, so and you say, bring a core of wheat. They say up to the attic for me. All right. Halach ve'elalo. Oops, sorry. So the emissary, the ambassador, the agent, the servant, whoever this may be, went and fetched the barrel of wheat, the core of wheat, and brought it up for him. Amarlo, the man said to his agent, Eravtali bahen kav chomtim. And he said, did you mix in a kav of chomton? I've never heard of this word until I studied this passage, which apparently is some kind of chemical agent that you would add in as a preservative to keep the worms out. So bring me a big barrel of wheat, bring it up to the attic. Oh, by the way, did you remember to add the preservative? The man says, Amarlo lav. Nope, I did not. Amarlo, the man said to his emissary, Mutav im lo he'eleta. It would have been better had you not even brought it up. So that's the parable. We're going to talk about that too. So we have two main subjects to unpack now. First are the I don't think we need to unpack the premise. I'm gonna start, just on the assumption that we all get the premise here. I'm going to add that rather than taking this passage literally, not that I assume anyone would, we should be taking it more as a figurative comment on what really matters in life. And if you'll recall, if you've been with us for the last few weeks, Rabbi Platkow and I have endeavored to make clear that the thesis statement of this semester of study is that the Jewish texts and traditions surrounding death and dying and afterlife serve primarily to comment on the preciousness of this life and how we live this life. So the questions that we are reportedly to be asked after we have died are really, I think, chiefly to be understood as a comment on what really matters while we're still alive, right? There's nothing in this text that really tells us much about the afterlife, but it does tell us a lot about where Judaism places the emphasis on the this life, on the here and now as opposed to the hereafter. And in the here and now, we have these six questions that are asked that seem to constitute a righteous life, though again, nothing in this passage alone is mentioned about, well, what happens if you pass or fail, or do you have to get 4 out of 6, or do you need 100%? Like how is it graded? What are the rewards or the punishments? None of that is mentioned here. The only thing that is mentioned is if you can answer these questions in the affirmative, then the fear of God is that person's treasure. Using this lovely yet ambiguously intended verse from the book of Isaiah as the kind of that's the prize. The prize is not 72 virgins in paradise, to quote another possibly familiar fundamentalist religious tradition about what awaits us or what awaits the pious after they die. None of that. Just, okay, then you're in God's good graces, as it were. That's the first part of the text that we're going to spend quite some time, I think, in dialogue about in a moment. The second one is the parable. What does this parable mean? Like most parables, it is phrased in allegoric, symbolic language. And again, just to paraphrase what happens, a man says to his servant, "Go get me a big bucket of wheat, bring it up to the attic." So that's like a significant effort. He brings it up. The guy says, "Oh, did you remember to put in the preservative so the worms don't eat it?" The guy says, "No, I forgot. I didn't." And the man says, "It would have been better had you not brought it up at all." All right, so what's going on in this text? And you can take up either theme. You can start. We're really here just to talk about this sugya in its entirety. So you can ask questions. You can comment on what you've seen. I'm happy to bring the text back on screen for reference. All right. So use this time to comment here. I'm gonna actually reformat the text so you can just see the translation. Okay. Uh, if I can find it. Here we go. with regard to the same verse. Rava said. All right. Thoughts, intrigue, questions? What stood out for you? What confused you? What do you think this says about Jewish priorities? Judy, are you raising a hand or are you just trying to reach for your iPad? I'm not sure. That's Judy Lass, not Judy Gross. Thoughts, questions? See, this is what happens when my dad has an appointment and can't make class. He's my first to raise a hand. Okay, Judy Gross, you're on.
I have a comment. I once listened to a woman speak. It was actually at St. James the Less Church. So it was an interfaith situation. And she said this in a speech, and I wrote it down and I keep it with me. It's an excerpt from a conversation between Confucius and Zizek. And the point of it in general is it says, practice the art of attention and listening. Practice renewing yourself every day. Practice meandering towards the center of every place you visit. Practice the ritual of reading sacred text.
Hmm.
Practice the expression of gratitude and praise singing. And I think the intent of getting to the center of things, not just looking at things superficially, but whatever you do, it's kavanah is also part of it. Is what is the intent? And where are you? Look at the flower, but just don't look at the flower. Look at the stem and think about what makes the flower and think of the beauty of the flower and think of the color.
Beautiful.
There's just, and if you live a life superficially, eh, you're not bringing the preservative with you.
Nice. So you're really commenting, I think, on two aspects of the text or two notions that the text raises. One is it's not enough to set a time for study. You have to pilpel it. You have to really get granular. And that's not just a discipline for how we approach Torah. That's also, I think, some real wisdom for life. And you notice it doesn't say you should be pilpel with your Torah. It says you should be pilpel with wisdom, right? So in other words, like surface glancing is not Jewish. Deep, deep, deep inspection and introspection is a Jewish approach to things. The second one about this idea of the preservative. Last week we talked at length. Rabbi Plakow guided us through a text, and then I guided us through a couple of complementary texts as well, all of which pointed to a common aphorism, which is you can't take it with you, right? We ended last week, you may recall, with the image of a child being born into the world with clenched fists, as if to say, I'm going to take everything with me, but a person dying and stretched out in the casket with hands open, as if to say, I can take nothing with me. And then, of course, you have the counterpoints, which are from Jewish tradition, which are, well, then what's it all for? If you can't take it with you, what's it all for? And this text makes clear that no, 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 it is for something very important. Here are the endeavors that really matter in our life. And I love how you talked about like the close attentiveness, a life of what I think whether you're whether you want to use a lightly disparaging term like new age or a more neutral term like mindfulness practice. Mindfulness
Right.
encourages us to walk through
Yes.
life intentionally, not unintentionally. And as you say, Judy, that's the kavanah, right? Even though the word kavanah is not mentioned here and the word keva is, I think that much of this text is pointing to a life of kavanah, a life that is lived with intention, is one that will preserve what is good, even after you die. You didn't just have a surface go at it. Okay, let's hear a few more reflections. I really appreciate that. In the order I see hands raised or microphones unmuted. Joe Russell Allen in that order, please. Just unmute yourself before you speak. Joe, we've got you.
Thank you. There were 3 points on which I wanted to that were in my mind. One was the order, one was the pilpel, and one was the core. Let's see if I can remember that.
Great, I'll
In the
remember for
term,
you.
in the terms of order, I think that first question was an overall uh, observation of life, how you lived your life. If you dealt every day in business tr loyally and trustfully and responsibly and all, all the good, then the rest of your life was worthwhile and good. Now, I don't like not that I don't like. I think the order for the second question should have been the one on family, because
Mhm.
I think if you deal well and you do your family responsibilities appropriately, as the way we think about it, then I think you're already following Torah without even looking at Torah,
That's really
without
nice.
having Torah as one of your leanbacks.
That's nice,
Now,
Joe. The core, okay, so you wanted to talk about the pilpel and the core
yeah,
being the measure of wheat.
apropos to what Judy said, the pilpel reminds me that the whole idea, the concept is, even though somebody has an education, they're not educated if they don't use the pilpel, method of going through their daily life or their thinking about things and so on. I think if you get to the spice of something, means that you're looking underneath the surface
Yeah,
and you're getting to the essence of what you're trying to learn, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to say, and so on. And the
beautiful.
last thing on core, I think that says, it left with me the expression, if you're not going to do something good, don't do it at all.
Mm, right. Thank you. Right. Don't do anything half-heartedly. I'm reminded of one of the books that, Torah is a book that by Jewish practice, but also I think the way I'm just wired is one that I keep turning to and returning to. One of the other ones that I've read many times is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. And a passage came to mind, and I just want to read it for you. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it, and publish its meanness to the world? Or if it were sublime, to know it by experience, and be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion. Probably the most quoted passage from Walden, one of my all-time favorite passages in literature. It speaks to me in a meaningful dialogue with today's text. Okay, Russell, you're up.
Well, thank you. Well, as a lifelong devotee of American literature, I have to thank you for quoting Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Nope, Henry David Thoreau.
Thoreau.
Though, fun
There's
fact,
a
Emerson's mom, I mean, Emerson and Thoreau were friends. And apparently, it wasn't all the rough and rugged life for Henry David Thoreau. Apparently, Ralph Waldo Emerson's mom packed him care packages that he picked up every week as he was roughing it by Walden Pond. Okay, go on.
well, and my point is that he was a big difference between this passage and the Pilpel philosophy noted by the Talmud is that Henry David Thoreau was also a hypocrite because he was living on land owned by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was getting a free ride. What the Pilpel admonition says to me, it's, I mean, Joe correctly referred to spice. Deuteronomy tells us that, the message isn't out there, it's in your mouth. And what I love about this passage is that it's sort of balancing the spiritual, the theoretical, the commercial, the practical, and the sensual aspects of life all at once.
Nice.
Were you fair in business? Where did you put this in your mouth and taste it? Did you truly delve into the meanings of words, or did you take them so as I say, everything, your daily commercial life, your sensual life, your intellectual life, and then finally going up to the attic, and is to me is the spiritual life. Um, what I liked about, and finally, I would point out that what the uh, attic parable says to me, he's saying if you're not, I don't think it's saying if you're not going to do a good job, don't do it at all.
Hmm.
What's I think what it's saying is don't think that you're going to elevate yourself
Hmm.
unless you are doing it looking with an eye to permanence, with an eye to perfection and permanence. And that means most of us may never get to the attic, but but you got to try. That is the spirit with which you need to approach this. And if Henry David Thoreau was reaching for that perfection, then I applaud him.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Okay, Alan, did you want to chime in here, please?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? I'm on my phone for the
Yeah,
first
we hear
time.
you great.
Terrific. Early in your lecture, you talked about the sequence of the first three questions and if there was a meaning to it. And I'm in the business world, and to be a little bitter, I deal on a daily basis with chazers and with schnorrers. And I feel that if you conduct your business with integrity, in fact, with a little bit of a stretch, you are then uh, conducting the way you for the other two questions.
Nice. Say one sentence more and how you're making that connection. I like how you're thinking through it.
Uh, you know, if you in business, sometimes you come up with dilemmas and what is the right thing to do and what is more of a right thing to do on the other side of the same coin. So in approaching that, um, you're really praying with intention. You just
Beautiful.
you're just not skating along.
Beautiful.
Uh, and frankly, if that's how you live your life, and your children and family see how you live in your business world, then you're procreating.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. And then again, these all of these terms are, I think, intentionally ambiguous and euphemistic so that, these are lovely in the imaginative possibilities that the reader can bring to the text and not only for what the text literally describes, right? So it doesn't say, so one of the phrases that we haven't unpacked that I think is worth redirecting our attention to is the one, Sipita Lishua, which is a really interesting, again, I'm going to say deliciously ambiguous phrase. Sipita, did you await or anticipate Lishua, salvation? Um, I first was introduced to this text as a rabbinical student, but I first heard it used in a sermon by my first rabbinical mentor, Les Gutterman, one of my early rabbin, I shouldn't say my first, one of my early rabbinical mentors. He really was my rabbi for all of my rabbinical school years and into my rabbinate as his assistant rabbi in Providence, Rhode Island. And Les Gutterman once gave a high holiday sermon, a Yom Kippur sermon, where this was the text. Back in a day where it was not obligatory for a rabbi to talk about Mamdani from the Bima. Simpler times when rabbis could actually just teach Talmud from the Bima on Yontif, and everybody would feel that they had gotten all of the Yontif nourishment that they needed from their Rav. Okay, yes, that was an editorial. Forgive me. It's a little bit vexing to live in such a time where the headlines occupy as much of our mental bandwidth and the expectation that rabbis will be commenting as much on a newspaper as on the Torah. If it were up to me, I wouldn't have to, but here we are. We're living in the real world. Nevertheless, he used this text and he translated the phrase "sipita lishua" as "Did you live with hope?" Which I just absolutely love that. Yes, is that poetic license? I think it is. But did you await salvation and did you live with hope are certainly sibling or cousin phrases. And this idea that it is Jewish not only to live for the here and now, not only to live for what sensory or sensual pleasures one might experience, but as Russell said, it's all of the above. It is what are both the pursuits of your life that will give meaning, but in this phrase, tzipita lishua, like what is the overall character or disposition, attitude that you bring to the enterprise of living? Is it one of despair and dismay, or is your fundamental attitude one of hope that things could be better? It's not even about like, did you go out there and do tikkun olam? It's did you live in such a way that demonstrates that salvation is possible? It's just, I think, one of the richest two words in all of the Talmudic literature. It's the one that I really hang on to. It's like, well, what do I want not my epitaph or my eulogy to say about me, but what do I want my legacy to be, so to speak, when I die? That's not a bad one. He lived with hope. She lived with hope. Like, that's not a bad thing for people to say about us after we're gone. That we lived in such a way that suggested that despite all the dross of the world as it is, we never gave up hope that things could be more like the way they ought to be. Aaron, do you want to chime in here? Nice to see you.
I was just going to say, I appreciate your color on that because it may be that I'm super literal and am not as good at literature as the rest of this group, but awaiting salvation is very passive. And so the text feels very passive to me. But living in a way that demonstrates that things could get better, I think makes it a much more active, by definition, thing that we can do as opposed to just sitting there and waiting for the Messiah, which is in practicality, not actually trying to make the world a better place at all. So I appreciated that.
Well, thank you so much. And trust me, I really do believe that the world needs emergency room doctors who work with children and save their lives as much as the world needs poets. Audrey?
I just wanted to circle back to your discussion of hope. When I was 12 years old, a few centuries ago, Rabbi Stern gave, I think it was a High Holy Day sermon. And he said, and this stuck with me, he said that there are very few dogmas in Judaism, but one of them, and one of the prime ones, is hope. And when you think to the anthem of Israel being
No.
no?
No. Joe wasn't talking to you.
Oh, okay. It is the centerpiece, a centerpiece
Yeah.
of Judaism.
It is. We are the people whose anthem is Hatikva, the hope. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Thank you. And it's yes. I mean, Rabbi Stern's writing, which is preserved in a wonderful volume. I think we still have copies. If you've never received one, see me because you should have this at home and you should read it cover to cover. That's another book that I've read many times called "The Right Not to Remain Silent," which was a retrospective collection of Rabbi Stern's greatest hits from the Bima, his sermons over his entire career at WRT that we presented as a tribute to his leadership, I think upon his 80th birthday. He died at 85. So a few years before he died, he got to see that collection published. Jonathan.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
So, Mike, I'm wondering why we are whoever is asking why these questions are being asked at all, because we're taught that everything we do, well, not everything, but the things that are stored up for us in the world to come. So if God is all-knowing, why the questions?
Yeah, really good question, right? Why do we have to be asked? And I think, again, there's no right or wrong answer. One possible response would be, it's not for God. I mean, it's interesting that even the God only comes about through this strange allusion to a verse from the book of Isaiah in which it says, the fear of God is that person's treasure, which is really, I think, again, my read as both as a student of poetry suggests that, the reward, so to speak, of living in such a way that you could respond yes to these questions means that you have lived in uh, with reverence for God. That's what it means to live a life of true piety. Not I went to shul 5 times a day and I beat my chest on Yom Kippur and I wore my tefillin faithfully and I participated in all the ritual aspects of Judaism, but I was righteous in business. I raised up children into the world. I paid attention to the wisdom of our tradition. I made it my practice to live a life of Torah, and I had hope in a better world. Like all of those things are, that's what it means to live in fear, though, in the sense of awe of God. That's what it means to live a life of religious awe or reverence. And it's not that God needs to evaluate us, because again, the text really doesn't get into the mechanics of reward and punishment. This is a text about ultimate meaning and worth, and this idea of, this is the stuff that's going to preserve what little of life you're able to quote unquote take with you when you die, which is effectively nothing except your name and your legacy and what will people say about you? How will people remember you? What kind of a impact did you make on the world? I often say to families that it's not enough. It's not only that our loved ones live on after they die because we remember them, it is also through the change they made in the world. Like that's very hard to note because it is on the one hand infinitesimal. It's so minute. Like, my footsteps wash away, so what's my impact? Is it only that maybe somebody after I'm gone is going to read something I wrote? I hope it's more than that. I hope that it's, that any one of us um, made a difference in ways that are vast and that we could never fully understand. Whether it is through the people we helped in our life, or the people we raised and brought up into life through family or teaching, or people that we just touched with acts of kindness and goodness. But I'm sure if you think about your own life, think about people who are no longer among the living, who made a difference in your life, and how much you are a product of their having been in your life. I think you might arrive at the conclusion that I've reached, which is that even though it is rarely acknowledged in its fullness, every human being leaves an indelible imprint on this world. And, you know, I hope that we can testify to the ways in which that has been done for us by others. Deb.
Yeah, I'm just going back to, being a good business person is number one. I think about what this is not saying, which is a monkish life, living off on your own, studying, and not being a part of society, not being a part of others, is not really great and not Jewish.
Right. This is not recommending a hermetic ascetic life. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. It's about engagement in the world and other people. And by the way, at least for many of us, and especially for the audience for whom the Talmud was intended, and yes, patriarchal men are the intended audience here, there's a recognition that, well, you may be a Torah scholar, um, but that's in your free time. Most of your hours are going to be spent making a living. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that that is not to be dismissed. I know people who work to live, and I know some people who live to work, but either way, how you comport yourself in your business, your day to day, that's a really important part of your life. And for many people, men especially, certainly the men in the community and many of the women, but predominantly the men in the community that I serve as a rabbi, this is how they spend the great preponderance of their time here on earth, is at work. And so Judaism or the Talmud here wants to suggest that that's not just about making money. This is a field, a domain in which the ethics of interacting with other people comes to the fore. Mara, please.
It doesn't seem to address women. It seems
No, it
only
does not.
to be addressing men.
I know. And again, take it, take it at face value. Also accept that this is fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh century wisdom from Babylonia, extremely patriarchal society. So I think that there is an opportunity for us as Reformed Jews living in the 21st century to expand the text to be much more inclusive. And the good news is, I feel fully authorized by the vagaries of the Jewish tradition to do exactly that, to read in such a way and to write the tradition in such a way as to include and not continue the practice of exclusion from 1400 years ago. Aaron?
I think it's the order which initially bothered me, because I felt like others at family should come first, is probably acknowledging that when you ask people their identity, their job is always first.
And men, again, men especially, and with men being the intended audience because they were the ones who were expected to show up and be in the study hall whenever they weren't working to make a living. Right.
It's also, I mean, this is a generalization. And so the men in the group should tell me how they feel. But even in 2025, the women I work with who do the exact same job as the men I work with do not view the work-life balance challenges the same way.
100% not.
It's much harder for the four of us in my group who are moms than the four of us in my group who are dads.
I don't doubt that for 1 second. Okay, I'm going to move on a little bit. I brought a couple of complementary texts now to round out our discussion, which seems to be the format we're settling into in this class, which is nice. Normally what Rabbi Plakow and I do when we're planning the lesson is one of us, we're kind of alternating. We'll say, okay, what's going to be the core text today? And she'll say, oh, I really want to do this one. I'm like, great. You prepare that text, and then I'll write a lesson plan around it. And that's basically how we've been doing it. She also said, oh, I want to learn with you how you teach a class. I'm like, okay, well, we're kind of like doing it as we go. Anyway, she'll look forward to being with us. We'll both be together next week. All right, so here's a passage from something called the Jerusalem Talmud. Okay, first issue, not written in Jerusalem. It was actually written concurrently to the Babylonian Talmud. So we're talking about the Common Era or the Christian era. The abbreviation CE is used by Jews to denote what our Christian friends customarily call AD, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, meaning Jesus time. Yeah, the year 2025 AD for Christians, CE for everyone else, the Common Era. So the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud were common or concurrent literary projects of the Jewish people of the rabbinic commonwealths, respectively in Babylonia, hence the Babylonian Talmud, and among the rabbis and their disciples who lived and wrote and practiced and took up their projects of expanding early Jewish literature, namely the Mishnah. So they're both deriving their wisdom from the same core literature, which was written around or by the first half of the 3rd century CE, and then elaborated from there. There did remain a smaller community of rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, chiefly concentrated around the Galilee in the north. And the Talmud that they produced, much less celebrated, much less studied worldwide, is known as the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, which is a nod to the fact that it would have been written in Jerusalem if the Romans had not exiled the Jewish people from Jerusalem in the year 135 after the failed Bar Kokhba uprising, at which point Jews were quite literally expelled from Jerusalem. It was renamed Ilia Capitolina, and the whole territory, Eretz Yisrael, was renamed Palestina. So it is sometimes called the Palestinian Talmud, though I tend to avoid that nomenclature just because it confuses people with today's Palestinians, with which it has absolutely nothing to do. It refers to a geography, not to an ethnicity. So the Palestinian Talmud is known in Hebrew as the Yerushalmi, or the Jerusalem Talmud, again with the proviso that it has nothing to do with Jerusalem except spiritually. So the Jerusalem Talmud has a passage that some of you may have seen quoted in short form, and I'm only going to quote in short form from the end of it, but it is directly relevant to today's conversation. So it says, uh, it's just this phrase that I've highlighted here. Rebbe Chizkiah, and if you want to see the corresponding Hebrew, it's this here. Rebbe Chizkiah, Rebbe Kohen b'Shem Rav. So the citation train here is Rabbi Chizkiah citing Rabbi Cohen in the name of a guy named Rav, who was just rabbi. Atid, in the future, Adam, a person, litain din, will have to give judgment or will have to give an accounting, v'cheshbon, and a reckoning. A cheshbon, by the way, is what you ask for at the end of your meal at a restaurant. You flag down the server and you say cheshbon v'vakasha. It's the bill, right? It's the check. So you have to give a judgment and a reckoning or a bill. Al kol ma shera'a eino velo achal, over anything that his eyes saw that he did not eat. Now, of course, they're not talking about spare ribs. And often when this is reprinted without the original, they add in the gloss anything permissible that your eyes saw that you did not eat. But of course, it is usually interpreted to mean not only food and drink. My sister, Becky, has this quote on a blackboard in her house. I don't know, Mom, if you're familiar with, if you've noticed that. But there's a line that Becky and Jonas, my brother-in-law, have posted. And I'm like, you have a quote from the Talmud in your kitchen? They're like, yeah, we like this quote. It basically says, a person will be held accountable in the hereafter for anything that he was able or one was able to enjoy in this world, in earthly pleasure that one did not experience. And if you know my sister, by the way, this is so Becky. Like my sister is, I'm the stoic and she's the hedonist. She is, we're both Epicureans, by the way, but she is much more like in the literal Greek philosophical sense of the word a hedonist, she's a total hedonist. There is no pleasure that my sister will not want to experience at least once. And my mom is nodding vigorously because, yeah, she knows her children very, very well. Unsurprisingly, I am textbook firstborn. She is textbook secondborn. There's a lot of interesting dynamics there, but I didn't come here to air my family's laundry. I came here to teach a little Talmud. And I wanted to just gauge your impression of this passage, which, in addition to everything that the Babylonian Talmud says about the meaning of a life well lived, this one adds something really interesting. It's an explicit nod to Russell's reference to the sensual dimension of life, that a person will be held accountable for anything he was able to experience that brings pleasure but chose not to. What do you think of that? I mean, at first, some people, I think it strikes as really not Jewish, but I wanted to bring it because, like we say about that ragu tomato sauce, it's in there. Or was that Prego? I don't remember. I could leave it and just say, well, don't you love it? Jonathan, do you have your
Does it refer to decadence?
Yeah. I mean, obviously there are limits to this, right? I don't think it's not the only thing that the Talmud or the Talmuds teach us about what a life well lived is. But yeah, I mean, taken to an extreme, I guess it could be decadent. But on the other hand, a little decadence, a little indulgence is not only permissible, but actually required in that, like, well, what are you doing here if you're not going to actually savor what life has to offer? And I think the word savor is a lovely way of getting around both the literal and the figurative dimensions of the Hebrew verb which is used, which is achal, which means to eat. But I would use the word savor. Anything your eyes could see that you did not savor, whether it's Judy's rose that you didn't stop to smell and really look at closely and appreciate its beauty, or it's that meal that you could have had but decided it was just too decadent. But when else are you going to be in Paris? Like there are the questions I think that that you may not associate as questions of ultimate worth in Judaism, and yet here they are. And I did not want to miss the opportunity to share it with you. Sandy, Aaron, Michelle, in that order, please. Sandy first. Unmute. Yep.
It makes me think of one of my favorite parts of the Torah, which is choose life. And I think that what you just read relates that, or choose life is part of that.
Right. Or it's
And
Thoreau saying, suck out all the marrow of life.
and that's all.
Yeah.
Which it's not just the chocolate ice cream.
Right. Yeah, it's everything. By the way, I am the definition of an omnivore, so now we're getting into food habits literally. And my philosophy around this has changed a lot over life. I did have a 10-year period that I now consider to be well-intentioned if misguided, where I kept a much more strictly kosher eating practice. And no diss to anyone who is disciplined in their Jewish dietary practice. I have other things that I'm disciplined about when it comes to eating. But the biblical definition of kashrut is just not one of them. But I have come around to believe that like to be an omnivore is not inconsistent with some Jewish wisdom, including the passage I've just cited. That what do I have to gain by not trying something? I mean, unless there's an ethical problem with
Right.
how the food was produced,
Right.
or if the food was produced at great suffering to the animal, to the environment, to the person who's eating it, then generally I think there's a Jewish argument against eating it. But trying something once, I'm the kind of person who, if I go out to eat and somebody says, "Oh, have you ever tried this?" I will never turn up my nose. I will always be like, "Never tried it." I've like never been interested to try it, but sure, why not? The worst that happens is I don't like it. Okay, Aaron.
I think it's a good reminder on the flip side of what we were reading before, where it's all about not necessarily sacrifices, but the harder things in life that we do, making money, raising our children, studying, going to school. And then also, I think, for me specifically, I live a very privileged life. And sometimes I feel guilty about enjoying things when the world is on fire. Um, and celebrating moments in my life that are good when other people are suffering. And this
Yeah,
is a reminder that that's okay, and that's not just okay, but it's very Jewish too.
that's right. I mean,
Both, both can live together.
there are limits. You can carry any of these premises to extremes that break the logic of what I'm trying to convey here. You know, the opportunity to feed children and diverting those resources to build a massive ballroom on one side of your house. Just as a, I don't know why that example
Generic example
is a
that has
generic
nothing to do with
example. Like
reality.
maybe that's not where you want to devote and dedicate your resources. Maybe, or
I
maybe
was
there's a good reason for it. I don't
I
know.
was thinking more of a celebratory lunch after a conversion a month after
Sure.
October 7th.
Sure. Why not? Sorry. I'm love that there's a YouTube record of this. I'm just like, okay. All right. Michelle, you're up.
So pretty clearly, Judaism does not preach self-abnegation.
Right.
This is not one of the ways where we achieve life after death, where you achieve salvation. This is very much an abundant world. But if part of the going back to your opening peel pull, which is spending a lot of time on one word, one idea, one thought, is fabulous, but also one needs to take in the entire collection, which is not just about arguing all kinds, seeing all kinds of things, but there is balance in there,
Yeah.
right? So if you follow, for example, the rules of say the holiness code in the midst
Etiquette.
smack dab in the middle of the Torah, which tells you, the laws of kashrut, don't cheat on your neighbor, make sure your laborer, gets his clothes back at the
Wages.
end of the day, whatever.
Right.
overnight. The point is treating other people appropriately. If you and you renewing the land and all of those sorts of things, you do achieve balance,
Yeah.
which I would like to think is one of the philosophies that comes through in the broader Jewish experiment.
Yeah, thank you. Beautifully expressed. And, you're in very good company, most especially with Maimonides. I mean, Maimonides, interestingly enough, I think derives the idea from Aristotle of the golden mean, of all things in moderation. Perhaps, as we've just noted from the Jerusalem Talmud, including moderation. But all things in moderation is an ideal that Maimonides extols extensively throughout his writing. In the introduction to Pirkei Avot, known as Shmone Prakim, that Maimonides wrote, it means the 8 chapters, there is a long excursus on why Maimonides believes that, again, everything is about achieving balance, and that true virtue resides as the moderate middle between extremes. And it's a defense that he, of course, is extracting from Aristotelian philosophy, but he frames it in normative Jewish language, and he uses Jewish wisdom to substantiate his point, which I think is what you're doing. You're seeing it in the text and saying an argument for moderation or for balance can, in fact, be made from a classic Jewish text, such as the one we're looking at today, without having to appeal to the Greeks. Maimonides is interested in harmonizing Greek philosophy and traditional received Jewish wisdom. That's his main intellectual project, I would say. But one need not appeal to non-Jewish wisdom to see it in there. Judy, and then we'll read a little bit of something else.
Well, this certainly doesn't appeal to any kind of an ascetic life or monkish life, and which many philosophies do head toward. To be divine is really to get away from the worldly things that are less holy. But I wonder if this leads to gratitude, and to think of something that you should take in and not let go by. Something that looks delicious or looks appealing, and just be thankful.
I love that. And I think that's a beautiful way, perhaps, of harmonizing the tension. I think the greatest example from recent memory of somebody who exemplified the tension between the the pleasures of life and the rewards of experiencing those pleasures, and also the rewards of discipline and asceticism, is none other than the great Jewish Zen Buddhist monk Leonard Cohen, who was both. He sequestered himself for years. I think he was 5 years in Northern California at a monastery, a Zen monastery, became a monk. He, by the way, saw no conflict with his Judaism in so doing. He lived and died as a Jew, and in his own words, was faithful to his Jewish tradition. So he didn't believe that he was breaking faith with Judaism. And yet at the same time, I think Cohen struggled with his early adult life, or his formative life, as a noted sensualist. And that tension is all over Cohen's writing, both as a poet before he became a singer-songwriter and especially in his music. That tension, I mean, just follow Cohen's lyrics in almost any song, and that tension between, love and sex and divinity is felt at every turn. And he was a notorious womanizer. He never committed, he was avowedly non-monogamous. And at the same time, I think he believed in a life of spiritual discipline. And so I think he was very much at odds with himself over his sensualist and even hedonistic tendencies, that probably remained unresolved to his death. And maybe, Judy, if you had had a chance just to sit with him for an hour over tea to say, what if it's all about just cultivating an attitude of gratitude? Maybe it would have put his mind at ease. But I think that Cohen's mind not being at ease was part of what directs his art. So
I like your poetic attitude towards
attitude of gratitude.
attitude, yeah.
Not original, but I use it all the time. Linda.
Yes, I was at the Westchester Jewish Conference, had an author talk last night on Leonard Cohen. I was thinking I would see you there. I was thinking I would see you there. It was really interesting how he held two things in his mind at the same time. The just like if you go to Hallelujah, it talks about all the horrible things, but Hallelujah, this is part of life.
The
Hallelujah,
holy
this
and
is
the
part of
broken.
life.
Mm-hmm.
It was really interesting and an interesting book that the guy has written. I'll have to read it sometime or other.
Yes, I wish I could have been there. I have my Wednesday night teaching my outstanding teenagers commitment. Okay, we're going to look at a different text, um, and I think that this will again make a nice complement with an E to what we've already studied today. So, those of you who participated in our 3-week mini course as a run-up to the High Holy Days this year, and last year, have actually been studying some Maimonides. We've been looking at Hilchot Tshuva, the laws of repentance from Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, which is his kind of condensed code of Jewish law, all matters Jewish law, in specific his laws of repentance. It appears that Maimonides was drawing heavily on the passage of Gemara, Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Rosh Ha-Shanah, pages 16b and 17a that I was noticing in preparing this week's lesson. So I have a few highlights to share with you. So if this sounds familiar to you because you were studying Hilchot Tshuva just a month or so ago, that means that you have a good memory, and some of these themes should be familiar to you. So, looking at Rosh Hashanah, Tractate Rosh Hashanah, page 16b, paragraph 4. Ve'amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So Rabbi Yitzchak, again, who is Rabbi Yitzchak? Well, we learn he is a 5th generation Tana. I've used 2 different terms for the sages today. The first one I used was Amora, the Amoraim, or Amoraitic. The Amoraim were the later generation of Mishnaic sages, and the Tanaim were the first 5 generations of rabbinic sages. So the Tana literally means the reciter, or the original, the OG, the original teachers. Okay, Rabbi Yitzchak said, Ein danin et adam ela lefi ma'asav shel otah. A person is not judged except for his own deeds. All right, so Steinsaltz gives us the following gloss. A man is, I don't like man, Adam is a person. A man is judged only according to his deeds at the time of his judgment. I don't love the gloss here. I think it's simpler just to take a literal translation of the words on the page. A person is judged only for his own deeds. Full stop. Sorry, shel otah sha'ah. I missed the keyword. The deeds of his own time. Well, that is a keyword. Shenemar, as it says, Ki shama Elohim et kol ha'na'ar ba'asher hu sham. God heard the voice of the boy where he was. All right. Really interesting verse, really interesting interpretation of the verse. The verse comes from the book of Genesis, the story of Hagar and Yishmael. If you were with us for Rosh Hashanah services, for the Erev service, Monday night, September 22nd, when the holiday began last month, so literally just a month ago yesterday, Rabbi Platkow gave a sermon about Hagar being cast out into the wilderness and how blessing, not just receiving a blessing, but giving a blessing, can open up otherwise foreclosed possibilities in our lives. And she made reference to this passage where Hagar and her adolescent son Yishmael have been cast out of the tent of Abraham and Sarah with God's permission. Sarah basically just says, I can't tolerate this woman being in my home. This son is an affront to me. Now that Isaac has come into the world, I want nothing to do with my husband's maidservant and concubine. Get them out of here. So they go out into the wilderness with nothing but some bread and a skin of water, surely going to die out in the wilderness. But then the action turns and it says, God heard the voice of the boy where he was. And the rabbis, in their midrashic way, make a lot out of that Asher Hu Sham clause at the end of the verse, where he was. Well, where else would he be? Like, why don't those words appear extraneous? This is the way rabbis read Torah. And if you studied with me for a long enough time, you know that whether there's anything there in the text doesn't really matter. The rabbis are simply highlighting the idiosyncrasies of biblical Hebrew and the way the Torah is written to forge their own pathways of meaning in how they interpret the text. But interpret is not pure exegesis. They're not just analyzing the text and saying, this is clearly what the authors had in mind or what God had in mind when he wrote it. Rather, they are reading into the text something that scholars call eisegesis. Not exegesis, drawing out the meaning, but eisegesis, reading the meaning you want to see into the text. And the rabbis make a lot out of these words. God heard the voice of the boy where he was. And in this passage of Talmud, that phrase is used to make the case that a person is evaluated only for where he is while he's there. In other words, what do we know about the progeny of Ishmael in Jewish lore? Who are they? Who are Ishmael's people? They go on to become the peoples of the Arabian Peninsula, right? Jewish lore imagines Ishmael as the father of the Arabs and the Muslim faith. To this day, the Quran enshrines that idea, and Muslims believe it too. So Muslims see themselves as the progeny of Abraham through the Ishmael line, whereas Jews see themselves as the progeny of Abraham and Sarah through the Isaac line. That's where the divergence happens in the way we recount our own stories of origin. Ishmael is considered to be an antagonist in the Jewish story. In the Jewish master story, the Jewish people, the people of Isaac, and the people of Ishmael are locking horns, right? They're not allies, they are enemies. But at the same time, they are siblings. Many preachers have made much of this sibling rivalry in framing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Like, you will always hear both imams and rabbis say, this is about the sons of Ishmael and the sons of Isaac, still like this, right? So what the rabbis want to say here is that whatever the Ishmael progeny line does in the future is not accounted to the person himself. Whatever your family story will end up being should not be imputed to you as your own personal transgression, right? So that's part of the point, is that we are only held accountable for what we do, not what our children do. And also, by the way, not what our parents did. Each one of us is an ethical entity unto ourselves, evaluated only for what we do in the limited time span that we're here, birth to death. Barbara, then Audrey, please.
I'm always curious as to what the Torah says about Ishmael, that he's a wild ass of a man.
Yeah.
And it seems like it continues throughout history.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it was written from the position of later Jewish civilization that already understood the progeny of Ishmael to be the enemies of the Israelites, the enemies of the Jewish people, and offers this somewhat disparaging characterization of the character of Ishmael himself as one who will, it's actually a divine promise, he will grow to be a Pere Adam, which means a wild ass of a man, which is not a very friendly translation. I prefer that you think that a good translation might be a bucking bronco of a man. Hard to contain, undisciplined, but very powerful. Right? So not necessarily wild ass in the sense of, like a kid who's just a complete jackass, but more like a bucking bronco or even bull in china shop might be a better idiomatic way of rendering that phrase. But yeah, it's not intended to be a friendly characterization. It's intended to substantiate why these people are our enemies. Okay, Audrey, please.
Well, taking this going back, and you said now that you're not supposed to blame the parents, but I always fault Sarah for kicking them out and being the beginning of all the problems we have.
Well, I think that all I'll say is this. At some point, if I ever wanted to write a feminist commentary on Torah, deeply indebted to those who've gone before me, including a number of my professors and those who actually wrote under Rabbi Andrea Weiss's direction, the Torah, a Women's Commentary, published by the CCAR Press, I would also wish to do what they have done, which is draw attention to the pivotal role that the female characters in the book of Genesis especially play in determining outcomes for the Jewish people entire. Right? One of the themes, I think this is really important for any reader of Torah, but especially any reader of Genesis, is to pay close attention, do a little pilpel, right? Read really closely, and see how instrumental women are in turning the action of the story. But usually not with muscles and swords. Men are these brutes, wild asses, right? Men just go in there and muck things up with violence. Women tend to use the domains of the domestic, so the house, food in particular. Notice how Jacob's ruse of his blind father Isaac is carried out over a bowl of soup. Also, the stealing of Esau's birthright carried out over a bowl of soup. Like food, and all of those were engineered by his mother, Rebecca, right. Jacob and Esau's mother, Rebecca. Notice how Sarah engineers the exile of Hagar and Ishmael. Notice how it is Eve who is approached by the serpent who decides to eat the fruit of the tree. Like, this is a story recursively told in the book of Genesis that behind every significant plot point that positions the Israelites for their eventual triumph and dominance amidst every odds that suggests that they should just be a forgotten people, it's actually the female figure quietly behind the scenes manipulating the action. But manipulating the action in ways that were, I think, specified to the role of women in a patriarchal society. In my view, every time I encounter Genesis, I see this theme emerging as one of the great stories that has yet to be widely told. Okay, Sandy, please.
I'm finding myself a little confused in the question of Muslims and Jews, because somewhere God says, I will make of your people a great nation. And so what is this negative thing about Ishmael that I'm not connecting?
No, I think it's fair for you to be confused. God's promise is to Abraham. It is repeated to Isaac and Jacob, but the promise is to Abraham that I will make a father of many nations, and that is the prophecy that comes true for Jews, Christians, and especially Muslims, right? But for Jews, we see ourselves as one nation of the Abrahamic nations, which include the progeny of Isaac. So in other words, Jews see themselves as the shoot of Isaac, which leads to Jacob, and it is Jacob who takes on the name Yisrael and becomes Israel. And so for us, Jacob is actually the chief ancestor. Abraham is the common patriarch to Jews and Muslims alike. So Abraham is revered as a prophet in Muslim tradition. In the Quran, he's Ibrahim. But this is like, if you want to start a Muslim-Jewish dialogue, you make a reference to Abraham. Case in point, the Abraham Accords, or as our president has now taken to calling them, the Abraham Accords, right? Abraham is a common figure between Jews and Muslims worldwide. And specifically, most of the Muslims in the Middle East are Arabs, which is a geographic, linguistic, and ethnic designation, not a religious one. Arabs are peoples with many different religions. Foremost, you can have Arabs who are Muslim, but you also have Arabs who are Druze and Arabs who are Christians. There are lots of Christian Arabs throughout the Middle East. And similarly, you have billions of Muslims in the world, or a couple billion Muslims, 1.5, I don't know. But the world's largest majority Muslim population is in Indonesia, but very few of those Muslims in Indonesia are Arabs. The vast majority of Muslims in India are not Arabs, right? The vast majority of Muslims in Syria are Arabs. So it is, you're right to be confused, but the key is that the family tree is common at Abraham, but diverges on the two sons. So Jews trace their ancestry to Yitzchak, Isaac, Muslims to Ishmael. Okay, last comment goes to Michelle, and then we will wish you a wonderful week and see you a week hence.
I just, if I can ask you to do one more thing, can you remind me what this has to do with death and dying?
Yes. The key is that the passage we were looking at, and then went down a deep rabbit hole, has to do with, oh shoot, I skipped past it. Here we go. How we are judged after we die, right? And the key is that when we die, we are judged only for what we did. It is not about our family legacy or family trajectory. It is not about, right, whatever your parents did is not part of how you are judged. Whatever you did is, whatever your progeny do is not part of how you are judged. And this is something, by the way, that is first made plain in the book of Ezekiel, in the Bible itself, who said, children shall not be put to death for the sins of their parents, nor parents put to death for the sins of their children. So this idea of collective punishment down the generations is one with a lot of staying power. In the real world, if you want to talk about inherited trauma, that's a different story. If you skim down a little bit, we didn't get to it today, but I think I'll probably pick it up next week. You can see that when you learn in the High Holiday Liturgy that repentance, prayer, and charity also make a difference in how we are ultimately judged, you notice that Rabbi Yitzchak nods in that direction. He says, a person's sentence, again, how are we evaluated when we die? Well, supposing we had kind of a mixed report card, which, by the way, we all do. Maimonides made that clear as well in chapter 3 of Hilchot Tshuva. Everybody's report card is mixed. But if you give charity, pray, change your name, and change one's deeds for the better, that can change the outcome, right? So that's sort of what we were referring to there. Okay, any last licks? Erin, you want to get in a final comment?
When we were studying together the meaning of suffering, didn't we discuss Talmud that says the suffering or illness, death of a child is punishment for
Redemptive.
parental?
Yes, it is both punishment and it can also be redemptive.
So aren't these two in opposition to each other?
Well, they're certainly meaningfully in dialogue with each other, and I'm so glad you recalled it, but that will be homework for me to examine for next week.
Okay.
All right, everyone. I'm going to wish you an early Shabbat Shalom. Be well, stay well, take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, hey, Dad. Good to see you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks.